update to my December 2023 report of my 1:64 scale scratch build of the third-rate 74-gun HMS Bellerophon of 1786. To refresh your memory, this was the last image with all the parts I had made: the framing, the 74 guns and carriages, the tabled rudder, figurehead that I carved, the bowsprit, jib boom, jack shaft and the jack, the spritsail and spritsail topsail yards, the lower main made mast with the trees and the fighting top, and you can just see them up there, the 6 swivel guns on this side and on the other side. The lower foremast fighting top with hers 6 swivel guns, and the lower mizzen mast top were made. And since that point, whoops, back one. Sorry about that. Since that point, I've received my 32-pound and 18-pound resin cast carronade barrels. The larger one, the 32-pound, is about 1 inch long, which is about the width of a thumb, and the smaller is about 3/4 inches. And these were printed from my 3D models that I created. You may recall that when I began installing the stern counter timbers to close things up, I noticed my side timbers were wrong as the foot rolled inward. You can see it here rolling inwards. Oh, I tore it all out, and this is where we left off with my build. So it was a major challenge for me, having added quite a bit to my scrap box, but I had successfully installed the new side counter timbers and the quarter filler frames. I then installed the deck clamps for the roundhouse or the poop deck, you can see here, and the quarter deck below it, you can see down there. The framing stiffened up considerably. The deck clamps are the beams running fore and aft along the inside of the ship's framing. They support the ends of the deck beams that run athwart ships. Here, the forecastle deck clamps are being wet fitted and formed. These needed to be steamed as there is a combined curve and a twist to them towards the bow. I have an old kitchen rice steamer that I use for this purpose. Now that the framing was stiffened up, it was time to close up the stern. Thinking of how bricklayers build rounded arches, I made externally mounted deck beams, or forms, with both the transom outboard horizontal radius, or rounding aft, and the deck rise built into them. These would help guide me and support my timbers in the correct positions, and are temporarily held in place with a dab of yellow PVA glue to the side counter timbers. Next, I needed a plan or a sequence of installation. First were the 2 full-length counter timbers. Second would be the short center timber. Third would be the slightly longer intermediate timbers, followed by the side bracing framing the gun ports, and lastly, all the shorter timbers after the horizontal beams were installed. To be clear, the horizontal line should actually be arcs due to the rise of the deck beams, but I couldn't manage to draw an arc in this program, so they're shown straight. Here, the aft counter timber framing and 3 of 4 horizontal arc beams were installed, and the external forms were removed. This took 3 attempts, resulting in yet more bits in the scrap box before I got it right. The lowest beam at the top side of the gun port has not been installed at this time. It was at this time that I installed the gun deck clamps, which were mainly held with 2 versions of wooden clamps I had made. The smaller version reaches through the gun ports. You can see down here and over on this side. And the larger ones reach down from above. They're long-reaching. The smaller uses elastic band to assist clamping, whereas I discovered the larger ones could be pinched at the top and they would bind and clamp without an elastic band. These are made of hemlock fir and are extremely lightweight and soft, so if they drop in anything, there's no damage. I have since installed the oarlot deck clamps below this level. You might notice the doorways are cut in for the quarter galleries on the photo on the right. Earlier, I just had them marked with the pencil where they had to be. It was now time for diversion, because that took quite a bit of time. I decided to build one of the many small for the ship. As per W.E. May's book, The Boats of Men of War, Bellerophon had 6 small boats, a 34-foot launch, 18-foot cutter, 2 25-foot cutters, a 32-foot and a 28-foot pinnace. I followed David and Cheryl's instructions published in the Nautical Research Journal, Volume 55, Number 1, Spring 2010. This is my 1:64 scale drawing for the 18-foot cutter, which measures 3 3/8 inches long overall. I started by making a blank for the plug onto which the shell of my boat would be built. This was comprised of 4 pieces of hemlock fir glued in pairs and an MDF or medium density fiberboard centerboard used to assist clamping in the bench vise, and 2 small dowels that were friction dry fitted into the holes to lock it all together. So this is the MDF board that clamps into my bench vise. Side and bottom and stern views were cut out from the plan and rubber cemented to the blocks, and then the boat profile was cut on the bandsaw. I selected 5 evenly spaced station locations and marked these on the rough plug. Templates for these 5 station shapes were traced from the plan and cut in a stiffer cardboard. The plug was then shaped to match using a wood rasp, files, and sandpaper. The soft fir plug made this very quick and easy. My keel, stem post, and apron, stern post, and knee were made using Costello boxwood. The stem post and apron are made in one piece as recommended by David in his instructions. As the apron is wider, the stem post needed to be chiseled, filed, and sanded into its correct thickness. Parts were assembled using white PVA glue as it dries crystal clear. The shaped plug was coated and rubbed multiple times with white gesso. The planking guidelines were penciled and grooves were cut into the plug to hold the steamed maple frames. Before installing the frames, the plug was given a good rubbed-on coating of beeswax. This is meant to keep any excess glue from sticking the shell to the plug, so when done, the shell can be removed easily from the plug. Straying from David's instructions, I added a shelf plate, this piece on the bottom, as I'd seen done by others. This fits over the center board, the MDF board, with a keyhole slot and is clamped snugly up against the plug with a nail through the center board below it. After drying, the heads of the frames are glued into holes to hold them in place. There's a hole there, and there's the head of the frame sticking into it, and they're glued on. Dabs of white Weld-Bond PVA glue were applied to hold the frames to the keel. The missing fore and aft cant frames were installed before planking began. I cut my planks from 1/32 inch thick hemlock fir using a number 11 scalpel. Hemlock is not a suitable scaling model wood. It has too large a grain and is too soft and brittle. But being a novice, when I first started, I had acquired a free supply of it. I had to scrap my first keel assembly made with it, but I vowed to use it somewhere on the build. Presently, it is here on my small boat, and it's also my false keel on the ship model. Here the garboard planks are installed and clamped. These needed to be steamed because of the forward and aft twists in them. One side was glued and clamped, and after drying, the alternate side was done to keep everything in balance. I traced the shape of the next plank to be made onto transparent tape, stuck this tape to my blank, and cut it out with the scalpel. This is how all my planks were made and fitted. As the cutters are clinker built, with the upper planks overlapping the lower, as you see on this side, I allowed a little excess for overlapping. I lightly sanded the overlapping edges on both planks for a better fit and overall look. When finally done, the timber frames were cut free of the shelf plate, and to my amazement, the shell popped off the plug intact. I added the additional frames, the risers, the thwarts, the bench rests on, and the gunwale. Here I am gluing the port side wash strake in one piece using wooden clothespins as clamps. Here both wash strakes are installed, as are the benches, floorboards, transom knees, breast hook at the stem post, and knees at the transom. Here all the thwarts are installed with a set of knees at the aft thwart, right back there. You can just barely see this one here. I've installed the reinforcing blank pieces at the oarlock or crutch locations. So these blanking pieces here and here. These are to be sanded down flush to the top of the wash strakes, and then the pockets will be cut into them for the oars. I made my tiller from a black jewelry wire purchased some time ago from Michael's, a local hobby supply store. One end was dabbed into a small puddle of white weld-bond PVA glue to make the ball, and when dry, I painted the ball black. The tiller was added to the rudder by simply gluing it in place and supporting it until dry. You will notice the 4 oarlock pockets with crutches are cut out. This was done with a razor saw, small chisel, and files, these little notches here. The gudgeons and pintles were added to the rudder, transom, and stern post. The bands are blackened cardstock. I used jewelry wire for the pintle pins. I added dabs of white weld bond PVA glue to the paper using the fine point of a straight pin to simulate nail heads. These will dry crystal clear and will appear black because the paper beneath them is black. Then came the oars. My source for dimensions are the specifications for oars of the U.S. Navy for the year 1900, published in the Nautical Research Journal and provided on the Model Ship World Forum, and also a formula provided by a well-known gentleman using the handle Druxy on the Model Ship World Forum with his build of a 28-foot American cutter. First, I used the formula L, the overall length, equals D, the distance between oarlocks, divided by 2, and then add 2. The sum of that is divided by 7, and then all of that is multiplied by 25. Once doing this, it suggested my longest oar would be 11 feet. Then I checked my father's seamanship training book, BR 67, dated 1939, which read a 20-foot Royal Naval cutter with the 66-inch beam, which just happens to be exactly the same as my 18-foot cutter, had a 15 and 14-foot oars. Compared to the book, the calculated 11-foot oar seemed too short for the 66-inch beam. Plus, the grip was too short for 2 hands. You can see down here, it's only 6 inches. You have to be a small man to get 2 hands on a 6-inch grip. So I could have used a 13 or 12-foot long oars, as they would store in the boat, but in my mind, it had to do more with the inboard to outboard ratio distance to dip the blade in the water while keeping your hands on the grip. So I split the difference. My oars are 14 and 13 feet long with an 8.5-inch grip, the minimum required for 2 hands and the longest that would fit in the boat. Here you see an oar on the blank of my mini lathe. I turned it down starting with a rasp, followed by a file, then sandpaper using my finger as a backing support when it started to flex. This image shows the blade waist clamped to the bench vise. Here's the top of my bench vise here. So this is how I held it to shape the blade with files. After this step, the waste at each end was sanded off on the tabletop disc sander, and the end of the blade was ever so slightly rounded off. The whole ore was completed with a few light passes of fine-grade sandpaper. Here is the completed 14-foot ore set against my marking template. And here are my 4 completed ores laid across the cutter. One thing missing was a boat hook, somewhat like this real one here. I made mine 12 feet or 2 1/4 inches long. The shaft was made from a quartered bamboo skewer, reduced on a draw plate to about 1 3/4 inches or 30,000ths of an inch diameter. The metal head was made with white weld-bond PVA glue. I began by rolling the tapered end of the wooden shaft in a puddle of glue to build a cone-shaped layer on it. This was impaled onto a piece of styrofoam and allowed to dry hanging upside down over the edge of a shelf so gravity would be working with me. Then I began to form the hook, applying dabs of glue. You can see it starting right there, allowing each dab to dry a bit before the next application. I used a wooden spring clamp clothespin to hold it, again with the dab of glue suspended upside down. I began with it laying horizontal to dry. Gradually, the shaft was raised to about 45 degrees, keeping gravity working with me as I built up on it to form the hook. When done, I painted the metal cap metallic black. So you can see my hook here and the tapered head there. Here's the completed boat hook in the boat. I will not be painting my small boats as I like the natural look and because my ship will have minimal painting on her also. I am presently working on my lower made foremast, shown above, being turned on my mini lathe. Below is the state I am at with it today. I am working on the assembly of the trees and am about to drill and install the monofilament fishing line full bolts. Actually, I've got those done just this afternoon before the meeting, and the tree is yet to be glued on there. The platform's already made. There's my cap that goes on the very top here, which is an angled tenon the way it should be, and the hole is angled here for it. And that concludes my presentation.